If this one muscle becomes full of trigger points, it can not only be creating your shoulder impingement, it might also be creating these 6 other problems. And I'm here from trainingmassage.com. And in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how you can begin treating your own shoulder impingement by releasing this one muscle in only 5 minutes a day. But before we do that, you have to know what that muscle is and what you're doing that's causing all these trigger points in the first place. Now that one muscle is the supraspinatus, which is a rotator cuff muscle. And it has been shown to have active trigger points in almost 7 out of 10 people who have shoulder impingement. Now you could develop trigger points because of several things, like having poor posture while being on the computer or while driving, which puts continuous tension on those muscles and then creates trigger points. Or you could be overusing it by performing too many overhead lifts and throws, or you just might have gotten injury in that one specific area. These are all the most common ways for you to develop shoulder impingement, but of course there are other ones that are less common, and if you know one, let me know in the comment section below. Now on top of shoulder impingement, having trigger points in your supraspinatus may also be preventing you from treating your frozen shoulder. Even though the supraspinatus is not the main factor when it comes to frozen shoulder, that's actually the subscapularis, which is another rotator cuff muscle. It has actually been shown that it can create inflammation pain around that joint area, or at least pain that feels like it, which makes you think your frozen shoulder is still there. Of course, that's not all. Having trigger points in this muscle can also create throbbing pain throughout the entire shoulder, including the front, middle, and the back. Meaning, if you have pain that feels like it's super deep, almost like it's in the shoulder joint, then it might actually be trigger points in the supraspinatus. Now one thing trigger points are known for, besides being painful, is the ability to create referred pain. Now referred pain is basically pain in one area of the body that's recreated by a trigger point in a muscle in a different area of the body. And for this very specific situation, having trigger points in your supraspinatus can also recreate the pain of having a tennis elbow. But to be fair, when you have tennis elbow, it is less likely that you're going to have trigger points in your supraspinatus. So make sure to work on the other muscles for your tennis elbow first before you begin tackling this one muscle. As you can see, trigger points are annoying little bastards, and unfortunately it doesn't stop there, because when you have a trigger point within a certain muscle, it's not only going to be restricting that mobility, it can also recreate pain when you actually flex that muscle. So since the supraspinatus is mainly an abductor, if you have pain moving your arm up to the side, or more realistically trying to reach back and smack your kids in the back seat, then there's a high chance that you have trigger points in this one muscle. Now on the flip side of that, if you have limited mobility trying to reach your arm up and across the body, then that might also be a sign that you have trigger points in this one muscle. If you take a look at trigger points, you will notice that they are a taut band within the skeletal muscle. So similar to how putting knots into rubber bands means the distance I'm able to pull it is much shorter, the same thing is happening to your muscles whenever they have trigger points. In fact, this is why a lot of us call trigger points knots. It's not because they are tied in literal knots, it's just because it's an easier explanation for people who don't do this for a living. And the last problem I want to cover that has a high chance for your supraspinatus to have trigger points is something called crepitus, or having a creak in your shoulder. And the reason why this is happening is because the muscle is basically tight and pulling on the humerus, which prevents it from having a smooth motion with the shoulder joints. Now one way to see if you have trigger points in your supraspinatus is to perform the Apley scratch test, which is something we do in the rounded shoulders rehab. If you want to finally fix the underlying issue for your shoulder pain, neck pain, and more, then click on the link in the description below. Now there are 2 ways we are performing this test to see if this muscle has any trigger points. The first one is going to be bringing your arm behind your back and trying to touch your scapula. If you can't reach the bottom angle of the scapula, then your supraspinatus might be tight and full of trigger points. Now reach up over your head behind your back as if you're trying to give yourself a pat on the back to test the other movements. Chances are, if you have shoulder impingement, This is going to be very painful when you're doing it, or you're not going to be able to do it at all, which is again also another sign that this muscle might be full of trigger points. So with that test out of the way, let's get into releasing this supraspinatus. And the first thing you want to do is actually locate the muscle, which I think is pretty easy because we have a lot of landmarks that we can use in order to find it. If you're able to reach over and grab your shoulder, and then start off by placing the heel of your hand into the collarbone on the other shoulder. Now let your fingers naturally drape over your shoulder, because when you do this, your fingers should naturally fall onto the muscle. If you feel your shoulder blade, then just simply pull your fingers back a little bit in order to land on the muscle. You can also perform some abduction by moving the arm out in order to try to feel that muscle contract. And another way to think about locating it is to simply go between the clavicle and the scapula, which is right behind those bulging upper traps. As to get started releasing this muscle, you can either use a massage cane or a small ball against the wall. Start off by placing the release tool on the most tender spot within the muscle. Once you're able to find a spot, then all you need to do is perform some static pressure for 2 to 4 minutes. The key here is to make sure you are breathing the entire time as you're applying pressure to those trigger points. Now besides static pressure, you can also perform some micro movements by moving your tool back and forth and side to side on that one trigger point. Or you can perform a pin and stretch by starting with your arm out to the side, pin down that trigger point, and then reach your arm behind your back as far as you can in order to stretch it out. Now if you do just one of these techniques or a combination of them for 5 minutes a day, then not only will your pain decrease and your mobility increase, you just might also be fixing your own shoulder impingement. Now if you're having other issues with your tissues, then make sure to click on the video in the top right corner. Thank you for sticking around, and I'll see you later.